The black SUV pulled up to the departure gate at John F. Kennedy Airport. The driver stepped out and walked around to open the back door. A woman in her early 40s emerged, wearing a crisp navy blue business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Her name was Victoria Thompson, and she was about to board a flight that would change everything. Victoria had built her technology company from nothing. 20 years ago, she started with just a laptop in her tiny apartment. Today, Thompson Industries was worth over $2 billion. She employed 15,000 people across 12 countries. But right now she just wanted to get to Los Angeles without any problems. The airport was busy as usual. People rushed past with their luggage, checking their phones and looking stressed. Victoria walked through the terminal with confidence. She had done this trip hundreds of times. The Los Angeles office needed her for an important meeting tomorrow. A major deal was on the table, one that could change the entire tech industry. At the check-in counter, the young man behind the desk looked at her ticket and smiled. First class to Los Angeles, Ms. Thompson, gate 15A. Boarding starts in 30 minutes. Thank you, Victoria said, taking her boarding pass. She noticed how his face changed when he saw her last name on the screen. It was a look she had seen many times before. Recognition, followed by surprise, then respect. She made her way through security without any issues. Her platinum status with the airline meant she could use the priority line. At the gate, she sat in the quiet first-class waiting area and checked her emails. Her assistant had sent her the final details for tomorrow's meeting. Everything was ready. Victoria looked around the waiting area. Other first-class passengers sat nearby, most of them typing on laptops or talking quietly on their phones. She recognized a few faces from the business world, but nobody seemed to notice her. That was how she preferred it. Fame was nice, but privacy was better. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding Flight 847 to Los Angeles. First-class passengers, please come forward. Victoria gathered her things and walked to the gate. The flight attendant scanning boarding passes looked at her ticket, then at her face, then back at the ticket. For just a moment, Victoria saw something in the woman's eyes. It was quick, but it was there. A flash of something that didn't feel welcoming. Welcome aboard, Ms. Thompson, the flight attendant said with a professional smile. But Victoria had been in business long enough to know the difference between a real smile and a fake one. The airplane was beautiful inside. This was one of the airline's newest planes, with wide seats and fancy lighting. Victoria found her seat 2A, right at the front of the first-class section. She put her briefcase in the overhead bin and sat down. The seat was comfortable, covered in soft leather. As other passengers boarded, Victoria noticed the flight crew, talking quietly near the front of the plane. 3 flight attendants stood together, occasionally glancing in her direction. The head flight attendant was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a stern expression. Her name, tag-read Catherine Miller. Victoria opened her laptop and tried to focus on work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. In all her years of flying, she had never felt quite like this. The crew seemed professional enough, but there was a coldness in their behavior toward her that she couldn't ignore. A businessman in the seat across from her was getting the royal treatment. The flight attendants brought him newspapers, offered him drinks, and chatted pleasantly about his trip. When they spoke to Victoria, their voices were different. Polite, but distant. Professional, but not warm. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, Ms. Thompson?" Catherine asked, appearing beside her seat. "Just water, please," Victoria replied, looking up from her laptop. Catherine nodded and walked away. Victoria watched as she immediately went to the man across the aisle and asked if he needed anything else, speaking in a much friendlier tone. The difference was subtle, but it was definitely there. The plane pushed back from the gate right on time. Victoria looked out the window as they taxied toward the runway. New York City stretched out below them, millions of lights twinkling in the evening darkness. Soon they would be in the air, and in 6 hours she would be in Los Angeles. During takeoff, Victoria thought about the meeting tomorrow. The deal they were discussing could change everything for her company. It would also make her one of the most powerful women in technology. But power, she had learned, came with its own set of challenges. As the plane climbed higher, Victoria noticed Catherine talking quietly with two other flight attendants near the galley. They kept looking in her direction and whispering. One of them even pointed slightly toward her seat. Victoria had excellent instincts when it came to reading people, and right now, those instincts were telling her that something wasn't right. She decided to test her theory. Walking to the bathroom near the front of the plane, she passed by the flight attendants. Their conversation stopped immediately when they saw her approaching. They stepped aside with forced smiles, but Victoria caught part of what they had been, saying, "Doesn't belong," one of them whispered to another. Victoria pretended not to hear and continued to the bathroom. Inside, she looked at herself in the mirror. She was impeccably dressed, well-groomed, and clearly belonged in first class. So why did it feel like the crew thought otherwise? When she returned to her seat, Victoria noticed that the man across from her had been offered a warm towel and a selection of magazines. She hadn't been offered either. It was a small thing, but in first class, these small things mattered. They were part of what passengers paid for. Victoria pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. Something told her she might need to document what was happening on this flight. She had built her company by paying attention to details, and the details here were starting to add up to something she didn't like. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign turned off. Catherine appeared in the aisle, pushing a cart with drinks and snacks. Victoria watched as she served the other first-class passengers with enthusiasm and attention. Each person got a personal greeting, a selection of premium snacks, and their choice of beverages served in real glasses. When Catherine reached Victoria's row, her demeanor changed again. The smile became more forced, the service more rushed. "What would you like to drink?" Catherine asked, her voice professional but cold. "Could I have a glass of the red wine, please?" Victoria asked politely. Catherine paused for just a moment. Too long. "I'll see what we have available," she said, then moved on to serve the passenger behind Victoria without bringing the wine. Victoria watched as the same red wine she had requested was served to 3 other passengers. When Catherine came back through the cabin, Victoria tried again. "Excuse me, could I get that wine now?" "Oh yes, of course," Catherine said, but her tone suggested she had forgotten on purpose. She poured a small amount into a plastic cup instead of the glass everyone else had received. Victoria accepted the drink without complaint, but she made another note on her phone. The pattern was becoming clear, and she didn't like where it was heading. She had a feeling this flight was going to be more memorable than she had planned. As the plane flew through the night sky toward Los Angeles, Victoria Thompson had no idea that this journey would lead to one of the most important decisions of her career. She also had no idea that by the time they landed, everything would be different for Catherine Miller and her crew. 2 hours into the flight, the dinner service began. Victoria looked up from her laptop as Catherine wheeled the meal cart down the aisle. The smell of well-prepared food filled the first-class cabin. Other passengers were putting away their work and preparing for what was supposed to be a gourmet dining experience. Victoria had flown this route many times before. The airline was famous for its first-class meals prepared by award-winning chefs. She had always enjoyed the food on previous flights. Tonight, she was looking forward to a good meal before diving back into her work. The businessman across from her was served first. Catherine placed a white tablecloth on his tray table, followed by real silverware and a cloth napkin. His meal came on fine china plates with multiple courses. There was an appetizer of fresh shrimp, a main course of grilled salmon with vegetables, and a small dessert. The presentation was beautiful, like something from a fancy restaurant. "This looks wonderful," the man said, smiling at Catherine. "Thank you so much." "You're very welcome, Mr. Davis," Catherine replied warmly. "I'll be back to check on you in a few minutes. Please let me know if you need anything at all." Victoria watched this interaction with growing interest. The level of service was exactly what she expected in first class. Now it was her turn. Catherine approached Victoria's seat with a noticeably different attitude. There was no warm smile, no friendly conversation. She placed a paper napkin on Victoria's tray table instead of the cloth ones everyone else received. The silverware was plastic, not metal. "Here's your meal," Catherine said curtly, setting down a single plate. Victoria looked at what was placed in front of her and couldn't believe her eyes. The plate contained what appeared to be a cold sandwich, with wilted lettuce and processed cheese. Next to it were a few stale crackers and a sem, all cup of what looked like cafeteria soup. The food was clearly different from what other passengers were receiving. "Excuse me," Victoria said politely. "I think there might be a mistake. This doesn't look like the dinner menu that was described earlier." Catherine's expression didn't change. "That's what we have available for you today." "Available for me?" Victoria asked, confused. "What do you mean? I ordered the same meal as everyone else." "I'm sorry, but this is what we can provide," Catherine said, her voice getting colder. "If you're not satisfied, perhaps you should consider flying in a different section next time." Victoria felt her heart rate increase. The comment was subtle, but the meaning was clear. Catherine was suggesting that she didn't belong in first class. Victoria looked around at the other passengers, all of whom were enjoying beautiful, multi-course meals served on real plates with proper utensils. "I'd like to speak with someone else about this," Victoria said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "I'm the head flight attendant," Catherine replied, "and I've already explained the situation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other passengers to serve." Catherine walked away, leaving Victoria staring at the sad meal in front of her. She pulled out her phone and carefully took photos of the food, making sure to capture the plastic utensils and paper napkin as well. Then she took photos of the meals being served to other passengers for comparison. The passenger in the seat behind her, an elderly white woman, was being served the same beautiful salmon dinner that the businessman had received. The flight attendant serving her was friendly and attentive, offering fresh ground pepper and asking about wine pairings. Victoria tried to eat the sandwich, but it was dry and tasteless. The soup was lukewarm and had clearly been sitting out for too long. She had eaten airplane food before, and this wasn't even close to the usual standard, let alone first-class quality. About 20 minutes later, a younger flight attendant named Rachel came by to collect empty plates. She looked at Victoria's barely touched meal with what seemed like genuine concern. "Is everything okay with your dinner?" Rachel asked quietly. "To be honest, no," Victoria replied. "This meal is very different from what other passengers received. I'm wondering if there was some kind of mix-up." Rachel glanced around nervously, then leaned in slightly. "I'm sorry about that. Let me see what I can do." Victoria felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding that could be fixed. But a few minutes later, Rachel returned, looking uncomfortable. "I spoke with Catherine," Rachel said in a low voice. "She said that's the meal that was assigned to your seat. I'm really sorry." "Assigned to my seat?" Victoria asked. "What does that mean?" Rachel looked even more uncomfortable. "I don't know all the details. I'm just following orders." The young woman walked away quickly, leaving Victoria with more questions than answers. She made more notes on her phone, documenting the exact time, the names of the flight attendants involved, and their specific words. As the evening went on, the differences in service became even more obvious. Other first-class passengers were offered warm bread rolls, premium wine, and after-dinner coffee service. Victoria received none of these things. When she asked for coffee, she was told they had run out, even though she could see other passengers being served coffee just minutes later. The businessman across from her noticed what was happening. During a quiet moment, he leaned over and spoke to Victoria. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "but I couldn't help but notice that your service seems different from everyone else's. Are you okay?" Victoria appreciated his concern, but she wasn't ready to make a scene. "Thank you for asking. I'm managing." "This doesn't seem right," he continued. "We're all paying for the same service. Would you like me to say something to the crew?" "I appreciate the offer, but I'll handle it," Victoria replied. She made a mental note of his kindness. It was good to know that not everyone was oblivious to what was happening. Later in the flight, Victoria needed to use the restroom again. As she walked toward the front of the plane, she overheard Catherine talking to another flight attendant near the galley. "Some people think they can just buy their way into first class," Catherine was saying in a low voice. "Money doesn't make You classy, the other flight attendant laughed. I know exactly what you mean. Did you see how she complained about the meal? So ungrateful. Right? Catherine continued. We give them what they deserve and they still complain. Maybe next time she'll fly coach where she belongs. Victoria stopped walking. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. These flight attendants were openly discussing how they had deliberately given her poor service because they didn't think she belonged in first class. And their comments made it clear that their decision was based on something other than her behavior or qualifications. She quietly activated the voice recording app on her phone and moved closer to the galley, pretending to read the safety information posted on the wall. I don't know why the airline even allows it, Catherine continued. First class should be for people who understand proper etiquette and know how to behave. Exactly, the other attendant agreed. Some people just don't fit in, no matter how much money they have. Victoria had heard enough. She returned to her seat, her mind racing. What she had just overheard confirmed her suspicions. The poor service wasn't an accident or a mistake. It was deliberate discrimination, and it was based on their assumptions about who belonged in first class. She looked around the cabin again. Every other passenger was white. She was the only black person in the entire first-class section. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Victoria opened her laptop and began typing detailed notes about everything that had happened during the flight. She documented every interaction, every difference in service, and every comment she had overheard. Her business instincts told her that this documentation might be very important later. As the plane continued its journey toward Los Angeles, Victoria Thompson was no longer just a passenger trying to get to a business meeting. She was now a woman who had experienced something that no one should have to experience in the 21st century, and she was beginning to form a plan for what she was going to do about it. The flight attendants had no idea who they were dealing with, or what kind of power Victoria Thompson actually wielded. They were about to find out. Victoria put away her laptop and pulled out her phone. She opened her camera app and began taking more photos, being careful not to draw attention to herself. She captured images of the beautiful meals being served to other passengers, the elegant table settings with real silverware and cloth napkins, and the attentive service they were receiving. Then she took photos of her own tray table, still showing the remnants of the cold sandwich and plastic utensils. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Anyone looking at these photos would immediately see the difference in treatment. As the flight continued, Victoria noticed more disturbing patterns. When other passengers pressed their call buttons, flight attendants responded quickly with smiles and helpful attitudes. Victoria decided to test this herself. She pressed her call button and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Rachel, the younger flight attendant, appeared at her seat, looking slightly annoyed. Yes? Rachel asked, without the warm greeting. Other passengers received, could I get a blanket, please? Victoria asked politely. It's quite cold up here. I'll see what we have, Rachel replied curtly, then walked away. Victoria watched as Rachel immediately went to serve other passengers who had pressed their call buttons after her. She brought them drinks, snacks, and extra pillows with genuine smiles and friendly conversation. 20 minutes later, Rachel finally returned to Victoria's seat with a thin, worn blanket that looked like it had seen better days. Meanwhile, other passengers were receiving thick, soft blankets that looked brand new. Victoria documented this difference as well, taking photos of her thin blanket compared to the plush ones she could see on other seats. The captain's voice came over the intercom with an update about their flight progress. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently flying over Denver. We should arrive in Los Angeles right on schedule. For our first-class passengers, I'll be coming through the cabin shortly to personally greet you and answer any questions about our flight today. Victoria had experienced this before on other flights with this airline. The captain often walked through first class, shaking hands with passengers and making friendly conversation. It was one of the special touches that made flying first class feel exclusive and personal. About 30 minutes later, Captain Williams began his walk through the cabin. He was a friendly-looking man in his 50s with gray hair and a warm smile. Victoria watched as he stopped at each row, spending several minutes chatting with passengers about their travels, their business, and their experience on the flight. He spoke with the businessman across from Victoria for nearly 10 minutes, discussing the weather in Los Angeles and asking about his work in the entertainment industry. When he reached the elderly woman behind Victoria, he spent time asking about her grandchildren and her upcoming vacation. Then he approached Victoria's row. For a moment, their eyes met, and Victoria smiled politely, expecting the same friendly interaction she had witnessed with other passengers. But Captain Williams barely paused. He gave her a quick nod and said, "I hope you're enjoying your flight," before immediately moving on to the next row without waiting for her response or offering any opportunity for conversation. Victoria felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. The difference in treatment was so obvious that even the businessman across from her noticed. He gave Victoria a sympathetic look and shook his head slightly, clearly disapproving of what he had witnessed. She added this incident to her growing list of documented discrimination. Each event by itself might seem small, but together they painted a clear picture of systematic mistreatment based on racial bias. As the flight progressed, Victoria decided it was time to make some phone calls. She pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant's number, speaking quietly so other passengers wouldn't overhear. "Hello, Jennifer," Victoria said when her assistant answered. "I need you to look up some information for me." "Of course, Miss Thompson. What do you need?" "I want you to research Skyline Airlines. Find out everything you can about their ownership structure, their executive team, their board of directors, and their major shareholders. Also, look into their employment policies and any history of discrimination complaints." "Right away," Jennifer replied. "Is there a particular reason you need this information?" "Let's just say I'm having an interesting flight experience," Victoria said carefully. "I'll explain more when I see you tomorrow. How long do you think it will take to get that information?" "Give me about an hour for the basic information, and I can have a detailed report ready by tomorrow morning." "Perfect. Also, I need you to check our investment portfolio. Do we have any holdings in Skyline Airlines or their parent company?" There was a pause as Jennifer accessed the information on her computer. "Let me check. Yes, actually, Thompson Industries has a significant stake in Meridian Holdings, which owns Skyline Airlines. In fact, according to this, you're the largest individual shareholder outside of the founding family." Victoria felt a slow smile spread across her face. This was very interesting information indeed. "Jennifer, I need you to pull all the documentation related to that investment. Board meeting minutes, financial reports, everything. And I want you to find out who the current CEO and board members are. I'll have all of that ready for you first thing in the morning," Jennifer assured her. "One more thing," Victoria added. "I want you to research the airline's policies on customer service, standards particularly for first-class passengers, and see if you can find any information about employee training programs related to diversity and inclusion." After ending the call, Victoria sat back in her seat and processed this new information. She wasn't just a random passenger experiencing discrimination. She was actually a major shareholder in the company that owned this airline. The irony was almost unbelievable. She made another call, this time to her lawyer. "David, it's Victoria. I need some legal advice about documentation and evidence gathering." "What's going on?" David asked, immediately alert. Victoria explained the situation in detail, describing each incident of discriminatory treatment she had experienced during the flight. "Are you recording any of this?" David asked. "I have photos and some audio recordings of conversations I overheard," Victoria replied. "Good. Keep documenting everything. If this is what I think it is, you'll want as much evidence as possible. Also, see if any other passengers witnessed the differential treatment. Their testimony could be valuable." The businessman across from me definitely noticed. He even offered to speak up on my behalf. "Try to get his contact information before you land," David advised. "And Victoria, be very careful about how you handle this. Discrimination cases can be complicated, especially when you're dealing with a company you have financial ties to." Victoria understood the complexity of the situation. Her dual role as both a victim of discrimination and a major shareholder would require careful handling. As she ended the call, Catherine appeared in the aisle again, this time offering after-dinner mints and coffee to passengers. Victoria watched as she served everyone else with the same warm attention they had received all evening. When Catherine reached Victoria's row, her demeanor immediately changed to the cold, professional mask she had worn all evening. "Would you like coffee?" Catherine asked without enthusiasm. "Yes, please," Victoria replied. Catherine poured coffee into a paper cup and set it down without cream, sugar, or the small cookies that other passengers had received with their coffee service. "Excuse me," Victoria said politely. "Could I have some cream and sugar, please?" Catherine sighed as if this was a major inconvenience. "I'll see what we have," she said, then walked away. Victoria watched as Catherine immediately offered cream, sugar, and elegant small spoons to the passenger behind her, along with a selection of premium cookies arranged on a small plate. This was the final straw. Victoria pulled out her phone and began typing a detailed email to her legal team, describing every incident and attaching all the photos and audio recordings she had collected. As she typed, she realized that this flight was about to become much more than just a bad travel experience. It was going to become a case study in how discrimination still existed in places where people least expected it. The flight attendants had no idea that their behavior was being documented by someone who had the power to hold them accountable. They were treating her as if she was powerless, as if she had no recourse, as if she would simply accept their treatment and move on. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Los Angeles. We should be on the ground in about 30 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." Victoria looked out the window at the lights of Los Angeles spreading out below them. In 30 minutes, this flight would be over, but the real story was just beginning. She had spent the last hour reviewing all her documentation and preparing for what she was about to do. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, her assistant. "Found some very interesting information about Skyline Airlines. You're going to want to see this as soon as you land. Also confirmed, you own 23% of Meridian Holdings, making you the largest individual shareholder." 23%. Victoria smiled to herself. That was even more than she had remembered. When she had made that investment 6 months ago, it was purely business. She saw potential in the airline industry and wanted to diversify her portfolio. She never imagined it would become personal like this. Another text came through from Jennifer. "Also found the CEO's direct number and email. His name is Robert Chen. Want me to set up a meeting?" Victoria typed back quickly. "Not yet. I want to handle this my way first." She looked across the aisle at Catherine, who was now preparing the cabin for landing. The head flight attendant was moving efficiently through the cabin, collecting cups, and checking that seatbelts were fastened. She still had that same cold, professional expression she had worn all evening when dealing with Victoria. Victoria made a decision. It was time to see just how far this discrimination would go. She pressed her call button one more time. Catherine was busy with other passengers, so Rachel, the younger flight attendant, appeared at her seat. "Yes?" Rachel asked, looking tired and slightly irritated. "Could I speak with Catherine, please?" Victoria asked politely. "I'd like to discuss my experience on this flight before we land." Rachel looked nervous. "She's very busy right now preparing for landing. Maybe you could speak with customer service after we arrive." "I'd prefer to speak with her now," Victoria said firmly but calmly. "It will only take a few minutes." Rachel hesitated, then walked over to Catherine. Victoria watched as they had a brief conversation. Catherine looked over at Victoria with an expression that clearly showed her annoyance. After a moment, she walked over to Victoria's seat. "I understand you wanted to speak with me," Catherine said, her voice cold and professional. "We are preparing for landing, so I only have a minute." "That's fine," Victoria replied, looking Catherine directly in the eye. "I wanted to discuss the service I received on this flight. I think there may have been some misunderstandings." Catherine's expression didn't change. "I'm not sure what you mean. We provided you with the same service we provide all our passengers." Victoria felt a surge of anger at the blatant lie, but she kept her voice calm and controlled. "I don't think that's accurate. The meal I received was completely different from what other passengers got. The service was notably different as well." "I'm sorry you feel that way," Catherine said, not sounding sorry at all. but I can assure you that we treat all passengers equally, regardless of—" She paused for just a moment. "Regardless of their background." The pause was telling. Victoria caught it, and she could see that Catherine knew she had said something revealing. "Regardless of what, exactly?" Victoria asked quietly. Catherine's face flushed slightly. "I just meant that we don't discriminate based on anything. Everyone gets the same service." "But that's not what happened tonight, is it?" Victoria said, her voice still calm but with a steel edge that people in her boardroom knew well. "Would you like to know what I think really happened?" Catherine looked uncomfortable but tried to maintain her authority. "Ma'am, I need to leave the plane." As she walked toward the exit, Catherine appeared in her path one last time. "Ms. Thompson," Catherine said quietly, "I want to apologize. I made a terrible mistake." Victoria stopped and looked at her. "Catherine, let me ask you something. If I wasn't wealthy and powerful, if I was just a regular passenger, would you still think you made a mistake?" Catherine hesitated, and that hesitation told Victoria everything she needed to know. "That's the problem," Victoria continued. "You're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry about who you did it to. There's a big difference." Victoria walked off the plane and headed straight to the hotel. She had a lot of work to do before the meeting. An hour later, Victoria sat in a conference room at the airport Marriott with Robert Chen, the head of HR Patricia Webb, and customer service VP Michael Torres. James Patterson sat beside her with his notes, and Rachel sat nervously in the corner. Victoria had prepared a presentation using her laptop. She started with the photos of her meal compared to other passengers' meals. The difference was so stark that Patricia Webb gasped audibly. "This is unacceptable," Robert said immediately. "Victoria, I am so sorry this happened to you." "Don't apologize to me because I'm a shareholder," Victoria replied. "This should be unacceptable regardless of who it happened to." She played the audio recording of Catherine and the other flight attendant discussing how some people didn't belong in first class. The room fell silent as they listened to the openly discriminatory comments. "My God," Michael Torres whispered. "They actually said that?" James Patterson spoke up. "I witnessed the entire thing. The differential treatment was so obvious that other passengers noticed. This wasn't subtle bias. This was deliberate discrimination." Rachel finally found her courage and spoke. "Catherine told us before the flight that we should know our place when serving certain passengers. She said some people needed to learn that money couldn't buy class." Patricia Webb was taking furious notes. "This is a clear violation of our anti-discrimination policies. We're going to need to conduct a full investigation." "No," Victoria said firmly. "We're not going to investigate. We're going to act. Tonight." Robert looked surprised. "Victoria, we need to follow proper procedures." "Robert, I have documented evidence, witness testimony, and audio recordings." The flight attendant admitted to discriminatory treatment. "What more investigation do we need?" Victoria pulled out her phone and showed them more photos. "This is what every other passenger received for dinner. This is what I received. The evidence is overwhelming." She looked around the room at each person. "Catherine Miller is terminated, effective immediately. Any other crew member who participated in or failed to report this discrimination is also terminated. And we're implementing immediate changes to prevent this from ever happening again." "Victoria, we can't just fire people without due process," Patricia Webb protested. "Yes, we can," Victoria replied calmly. "This is a clear case of discrimination in violation of federal law and company policy. We have multiple witnesses and documented evidence. Any lawyer would tell you we have grounds for immediate termination." James Patterson nodded in agreement. "She's absolutely right. The evidence is overwhelming." Robert Chen looked around the room, then made a decision. "Patricia, prepare the termination paperwork for Catherine Miller and any other crew members involved. Michael, I want a comprehensive review of our service standards and training programs. This cannot happen again." But Victoria wasn't finished. "That's just the beginning. I want mandatory anti-bias training for all flight crews. I want an anonymous reporting system for discrimination incidents. I want diverse hiring practices and promotion standards. And I want a customer advocate position created to handle discrimination complaints. Victoria, these are major changes, Robert said. They'll require board approval and significant resources. Victoria smiled. Robert, I'm the largest individual shareholder. I think I can convince the board to approve whatever changes are necessary to protect our passengers and our reputation. Over the next 3 hours, they worked out the details of a comprehensive anti-discrimination program. Rachel was promoted to a training position where she would help implement the new policies. James Patterson agreed to serve on an advisory committee to review passenger complaints. Catherine Miller was terminated that night, along with 2 other crew members who had participated in the discriminatory treatment. 6 months later, Skyline Airlines had become the industry leader in inclusive customer service. The new training programs were so successful that other airlines began copying them. The anonymous reporting system had already prevented several potential discrimination incidents. Victoria's story became a case study taught in business schools across the country, but more importantly, it became a reminder that power, when used responsibly, could create positive change that benefited everyone. The flight that started as a simple trip to Los Angeles had turned into something much more significant. It proved that sometimes the most important journeys aren't about where you're going, but about what you do when you get there. Rachel kept in touch with Victoria and eventually became the head of customer service training for the entire airline. She never forgot the lesson she learned that night about the importance of speaking up when something is wrong. And Victoria? She never had another bad experience on Skyline Airlines. But more importantly, neither did anyone else.